The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Season 2 of Future Proof. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh, and our first episode dives into agility and how to achieve business agility with data. So we're going to talk to Craig Chaplin from Magnitude Software. And folks, this is really foundational when it comes to the information economy, because obviously the new business model must rely on data. That data exists everywhere. And we're going to talk today with a company that has done some really cool things in the data space, really enabling access to data, and that is Magnitude Software. So a while back, they acquired a company called Simba, and Simba are the folks who invented the ODBC and JDBC drivers. Those are database connectors, and they have something called Magnitude Gateway, which is now being used to give much greater access, ease of access to information assets across the enterprise. So let's dive in and figure out how to give greater access. The title is Pivot to Success, Achieving Business Agility with Data. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, is here with Magnitude Software. Very excited for today's event, Pivot to Success, Achieving Business Agility with Data. Yes, indeed, today's speakers are yours truly and Craig Chaplin, Senior Product Manager at Magnitude Software. And folks, Magnitude are the people who bought Simba. And Simba, as you may know, has a long history in the data management space. They're the folks who invented the ODBC and JDBC drivers, used kind of by just about everybody in the world. So Magnitude Software and Simba are really at the foundation of the data space itself, which is very exciting stuff. So we're going to talk about that today.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Craig Chaplin. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Magnitude. Previously, I was with Simba, and which was acquired by Magnitude, as Eric mentioned earlier. So good to be with you today. Just a glimpse at Magnitude. For those of you that haven't heard of us or don't know much about us. So Magnitude has a portfolio of products that look at data management, analytics, business optimization, and of course, connectivity as well. We've got about 550 employees worldwide. Simba is one of those family of products that provides connectivity to our enterprise customers, but also a large number of our ISV customers as well. So companies like SAP or Microsoft, Amazon, Google, etc., and many of the BI vendors bundle our connectivity into their solutions. So today, we're going to look at some of the transformative changes that are happening in business. There's an obvious one, of course, that we are all living today. But what are some of the things that have happened over recently that has really driven how we do business, some of the business models we have, and of course, the reliance on the data side of things to be able to facilitate that. So just some examples that we've seen in the last few years, if you look at sort of the automobile and sort of some of the things that have happened in that space, the taxi industry, of course, is an obvious example here that's been upended. Their sort of model has really been hit by the introduction of companies like Uber and Lyft that are providing ride sharing. And even the notion of having to own a car in some places, is something that can be questioned right now that we have the ability to, through car sharing companies. And if we think about, how did that all come about from a technology side of things, it was a big part of that is that sort of ubiquitous mobile connectivity that we have now. So everywhere we go, it's really hard not to stay connected to the internet, right? And again, that's the type of thing that's been enabled through technology advances with broadband, right? So not only have we increased the speeds so that we can do things like video on demand, but the prevalence of broadband connectivity has also increased. So more and more users have access to this, and of course, that makes that model of video on demand, for example, possible. So, there's certainly technologies that can transform businesses, and you could argue that sometimes businesses influence what technologies could get developed, and so it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. But sometimes, business transformation happens because of world events. So it could be global conflict. So, one that's maybe a little bit back in history nowadays, but back in the 70s, of course, we had an oil embargo where OPEC shut down oil to North America, and that really caused a bit of a crisis in terms of not only people being able to fuel up their vehicles, but having to fuel up vehicles that were large, weren't particularly fuel efficient, and it caused real problems. People started to look at smaller cars, more fuel efficient cars, and that was from the Asian markets, from Japan. And so the domestic automakers really had to pivot and start to really change the types of vehicles that they were making at that time to provide what people were looking for. But in other areas too, it's interesting, because if you start to look at some of the hedge fund portfolios, you'll see that hedge fund managers are starting to purchase up farmland and water rights in parts of the world that maybe aren't currently the best farmland, but in a few years, as the temperature warms up, it becomes much more profitable. So they're buying up sort of rights, hedging that our environment's going to change. And of course, the increasing regulation to try and slow down this is not only creating new technologies, but forcing businesses to add that into their business models. So as far as what has sort of things like the pandemic and COVID kind of really changed here? Well, I think where many of us are now working from home, so we've seen a rise in technologies to help support that and sort of evolve. And businesses are trying to figure out how do they support their staff and being able to do that. So what's interesting is that even though whether it's something that's technology driven that's causing us to rethink how we do business or modify how we do business, or if it's global events that a lot of times are out of our control and we have to adapt to, some of the key concepts are still important regardless. And really it starts with customer experience. So it's an often used term, but really it's the difference between someone staying with you and going to a competitor. So really important to still maintain that. Collaboration, that network effect that we have with our businesses is crucial. And as we found, that process agility, so being able to really adapt quickly. So if your supply chain is disrupted because of a pandemic, for example, how quickly can you adjust things? We also see a lot of, especially with data in particular and data access, we see a lot more need for supporting the regulations and compliance, new privacy laws that are coming into place. So businesses are a lot more, are paying a lot more attention to those areas as well. As far as the technology side of things, I think these are probably pretty obvious ones, right? I mean, social media still remains a crucial way of communicating and communicating with your customers. Analytics and AI is really kind of a space that's really started to heat up in the last 10 years or so. And this is because we actually have more data to work with. I'll talk about that in a minute. IoT, so Internet of Things, is one of those things that's feeding that additional data. It's what's enabling us to really sort of, provide that instrumentation on different devices and smart devices. Cloud and mobile, we talked about earlier, that mobile experience, being able to, everyone has a mobile phone. They're quite powerful now. So being able to deliver, your business services and your products through a mobile interface. And of course, cloud, I think a lot's been said about that, but just, the ability to leverage the cloud as a way of hopefully offsetting some of the costs of delivering products and services. So, when it comes to data, businesses today kind of live or die based on their ability to access and integrate data. And really because without data, there's no information. And without information, we can't do effective decision making. I talked a little bit about AI a second ago, and really that machine learning and AI tools are really starting to come into their own now that we have these large data sets that they can learn from. The insights that we can glean from those using those tools is much greater. So, why is sort of that access to data, really important? Well, if we look at sort of, the number of data sources that companies are using or their employees are using to make decisions, it's growing. It's always growing. So today we're looking at, in a typical decision-making scenario, more than 50% of people are looking at 5 or more sources of data to make that decision. If we pick on marketers for a second, we'll see, even in 3 years from 2017, they might be looking at 10 different sources to track customers. In 2019, that's all the way up to 16 now. Well, lots of different places. We talked a little bit about some of these, but social media, there's a vast amount of data there. Unfortunately, sometimes too vast for some people, but there's certainly a lot of data there on social media that is very useful for companies to be able to leverage. Smart devices, the Internet of Things. So this is feeding back information that's useful to understand how people are using your products, trends, perhaps. Help you forecast, where people are going with your products. Media, so when we think about the amount of video content now that's online, you look at YouTube, for example. It's more than just cat videos, right? There's a tremendous amount of data that can be understood by understanding people's viewing habits, the types of topics, the content that they're looking at. Biometric data, so ever more important as we start to really pick apart at a molecular level sometimes, what makes us tick, and certainly important in current circumstances where we're trying to understand the COVID virus, for example. Geospatial, so it's great to have data. Even better is if you know where that data was generated. And then, transactional, it's still around. It's still crucial to running our back office applications, and it's kind of the core. It's the record of us interacting with our customers through businesses. So we have, we kind of have this infinite cycle that that we need to be able to manage effectively. We have a tremendous number of applications that are already being used within our organizations. That's not going to be less. It's going to continue to grow. We have to deal with applications and data that's now deployed in multiple places. So it may be on premise, it may be in the cloud. And if it's on the cloud, it may be in multiple locations on the cloud, right? It might not just be in Amazon, it might be in Azure, for example. And then, if we look at kind of, the importance of data within an organization, it's only increasing. So currently, almost 70% of companies feel that data is their most important asset at the moment. So really, what has this meant for data connectivity? And sort of these are the trends that we've seen here at Simba over the past few years. The obvious one, of course, is that there's more applications and more workflows that are capturing data and larger amounts of data. We also have a lot of new applications and a lot of different types of applications to analyze that data. As the data takes shape in different formats, whether it's geospatial data, whether it's graph database, if you're trying to understand the relationship of entities, we have different applications that take advantage of that. I mentioned earlier, we have sort of more regulation around data, so data governance is becoming more and more important as companies need to adhere to privacy laws. And probably more, most important is that more users need access to that data. It's no longer just the data analyst, it's no longer just the data scientist perhaps, but it could be people on the shop floor, right, that need to be able to plug into that data. And ultimately, how do we, with all these new data sources and these new users needing access to those data sources, how do we facilitate getting them that access? How do we reduce that friction? So one thing that we've done at Simba is we have a set of connectors to a lot of different types of data sources. So whether they are your traditional relational sources like Oracle, for example, they could be some of the big data sources like HBase. They could be NoSQL sources such as Couchbase. But they could also be cloud data sources as well. So applications like Salesforce, for example, have a vast amount of data that's useful for people to be able to access to. And so we have a lot of these different connectors, and one of the things that's really important is to have a standard way of interfacing with those, because we can't have a unique interface for every data source for every application that needs to use that. So fortunately, there is a standard out there. There's actually a couple different standards, of course. There's never one standard. So ODBC and JDBC is a common one for data access, and the majority of applications that consume data support these interfaces. And ODBC is actually one of the technologies and standards that Simba worked with Microsoft back in the 90s on developing. So this is something that's been around for a long time. It's evolved since those early days, but it still, even today, serves a crucial need in providing that general purpose data access to these data sources. It does that through SQL, and which is still a very popular language. It's still used predominantly for querying data. So Simba has a lot of expertise in building these drivers, so much so that we actually get contracted and work with some of the data source vendors to provide that connectivity for their customers. So we'll work with them to best understand how their source works, how best to query it, and then build the corresponding ODBC and JDBC drivers to do that. So we do have a bit of a paradox of choice, though. So we live in a world where there's no shortage of data, and there's no shortage of tools to analyze and use that data, which sounds fantastic. So if we look at a single use case, if you took Excel, for example, and we want to connect to a set of different data sources, that's great. So you can come to Simba, and we'll be happy to provide you with drivers for connecting to each of those data sources. So that sets you up for Excel. But then what happens when you start to deploy that elsewhere in the company? So what happens when that user says, well, I use Excel for some things, but I have a BI tool for generating some of the analysis that I need to do. So now that tool needs to be able to connect to all those data sources. And now you need to actually provide that to all of your users in your company. Oh, and by the way, these data sources, they're not static, of course. They change over time. So Salesforce may add some new capabilities that generate some new data and some new objects that need to be captured. So now you need to keep the Salesforce driver updated. So this poses a bit of a challenge. And really we need to figure out a way, in larger enterprises, how do we help out IT? Because we ultimately know that IT is going to have to figure this out and is going to be responsible for deploying a connectivity capability. How do we help out IT and really sort of free up some of their very finite resources? How do we make it easy for them to manage all of that? So one of the newer products that Simba's developed recently is something we call Magnitude Gateway, which does that. So if you have a large number of users, and you have a large number of applications, and you have a large number of data sources, Magnitude Gateway is a product that can take away a lot of the friction, a lot of the maintenance hassle of maintaining all of that connectivity. So what we do is we provide a single driver, whether it's ODBC or JDBC, that all of those applications can use, whether it's Excel or Tableau or Power BI or any of the general purpose tools that can use ODBC or JDBC. We provide one driver, and it connects to Magnitude Gateway that's installed on a single server. And on that server is all your connectivity to your data sources. So what that means from an IT perspective is that you're really just managing connectivity on one machine. So as new capabilities are pushed out by us, you can deploy those onto that one machine, and all of your users have access to that now. The other interesting thing for IT, of course, also is data connectivity can be quite technical sometimes, getting it set up, figuring out which server do I connect to, what's the Salesforce URL that I need to use to be able to connect to Salesforce? Are there any performance options I should be using? Should there be any options that I should set to convert data? Perhaps I want to deal with, date time formats differently, for example. So these are all sort of options that are available, but they might be a little bit overwhelming to the end users. So from a Magnitude Gateway perspective, we allow IT to actually deploy those profiles once. So users don't have to worry about setting those up. At most, maybe they have to enter their user ID and password to connect to a data source. So really, Magnitude Gateway is about kind of lowering those maintenance costs, that maintenance burden, really trying to streamline the management of all your data connectivity. If a new data source is needed by a group of users, simply add it in one place and they have access to it right away. The centralized governance is crucial for IT. So trying to reduce their workload, being able to manage all of that in one place. And really, the other thing I didn't highlight too much here, but we also, with some of the data access, it's one thing to be able to connect to data, and once you have access to a data source, that's great. But a lot of data sources will then present you with tens of thousands of tables to choose from. And so really trying to find within a data source, where's the information that you're looking for can be a bit of a challenge. So one of the things we've done for some of our sources is what we call intelligent adapters, which is really trying to put a business view on top of those sources. So Salesforce, for example, we would present a business-like view of data that to the end user just looks like a single entity, a single table, for example. But behind the scenes, there may be 4 or 5 or more different joins between multiple tables in Salesforce. And all that complexity is hidden from the user. So it's a way of really helping people get ultimately to the data that they need as quickly as possible. So in sort of summary, access to data is really foundational to all of this. We can't adapt our businesses quickly unless we know what's currently going on, and wherever possible, try and really kind of predict where we're going to be going. And having access to data really allows those things to happen. How do we do that? Well, from a data connectivity standpoint, it's really about providing that standards-based data access, so multiple applications can leverage that access to data. We need to be able to get to data, irrespective of its structure. So if your data is stored in a relational format, great. But if you've actually got unstructured data as well that you're pulling in from a NoSQL source, we need to be able to handle that in Excel just as easily as we do with relational data. And so a lot of what the important thing here is to be able to coerce that data structure into a format that can be queried in a common way across multiple applications. It doesn't necessarily take away the need for very purpose-built applications to analyze spatial data, for example, but there's a lot of cases where you don't need a fancy tool to get to your spatial data. You just want to pull it into an Excel worksheet, for example. Accessing data where it resides is important. So, we've kind of gone from, accessing the data in place to let's put everything into a data warehouse. Let's put everything without worrying about too much how it's structured into a data lake. Let's try and speed things up by putting data in memory, maybe structuring it a little bit different. And of course, the cloud. So what I wanted to say here is that data doesn't exist in just one place. And in many cases, it's not feasible to move the data all into one place. So we need to be able to access that data wherever it is. If you can put it all in a data warehouse, fantastic. We can access that data warehouse. If you need to keep it in 3 different places, that's okay too. We have connectivity to those different places. And finally, to really kind of reduce that maintenance, so we know that the number of sources is going up. We know that the number of users that need access to that data is increasing. So a data connectivity platform like Magnitude Gateway, for example, might be the right option to kind of streamline some of that maintenance and connectivity needs. So, really trying to reduce the burden on IT and let them manage actually keeping getting the data to where it needs to go, rather than actually having to manage all the connectivity to it as well.
Yeah, and a lot of great points in there. If you would push one of your architectural slides out there so the audience has something to chew on while we talk about all this stuff. So you made a bunch of really good points. One is helping IT, right? Because we are in this really interesting transformation right now, where it used to be you had to rely on IT to give you the connectors, to give you the data that you wanted, but we need to move a layer above that, if you will, to enable IT to focus on different things, right? And you made a good point about how there are so many different sources of data right now, especially software as a service. We're talking 7,000 different applications are now being used by companies for sales and marketing automation. That's just the MarTech 7,000. That's not even accounting, billing, forecasting, all these other technologies that we need to use. So Gateway gives you this ability to really optimize what IT is doing, but at the same time, you're also facilitating data governance, right?
Yeah, I mean, a big piece of data governance is knowing what data are people accessing, right? And so, having that centralized in one location lets us do that. But also equally important is being able to govern who can access that data, and really being able to restrict, where appropriate, access to the data as well.
Yeah, so one of the attendees writes, to what extent is data governance necessary as a predicate to leveraging data towards success? I think it's a central component. And to your point, there are technologies available for data governance, but the real key is that you need to have some sort of control point. That's what we refer to in the risk management space. I started off talking about financial services. In the risk space, they talk a lot about control points, and that's the point at which you can effect some change. It's the point at which you can capture information, you can make a decision, you can say yes or no, for example. And what you're doing with Gateway is basically providing this marshaling area for data access, which again, just in terms of simplifying IT's job, allows the IT person to get something deployed once and then have anyone else who is logged in and authorized to the system access that. You're no longer having to cater to person A, person B, person C separately. You cater to the information system that they access, and as such, you're tremendously streamlining what was a fairly cumbersome and not very fun process. Isn't that about right?
Yeah, I think now that we have more users, more types of users, more applications, and of course more data sources, then yeah, IT's job has grown exponentially and more expensive as well.
Thanks for your time and attention, folks. I'm really excited about this. I think that Magnitude has done an excellent job of, as Craig suggested here, virtualizing the connectivity side, which for those who have not done it, I can tell you it is a very painstaking process. It's very detail oriented, and to abstract that complexity away and just provide this hub where business people and IT folks can collaborate, that's a big, big deal. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. Thanks again, Craig, and thanks to the folks at Magnitude and all these great attendees and your wonderful questions. We'll talk to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.